Well, good morning. What a great Army day. Sir, thank you for being here. I know your time's valuable, so I'll get moving through this quickly. Of course, this is the Military Forum on Army Talent Management in 2028. You heard the Secretary on Monday. You heard the Chief yesterday. People are the Army. People are a priority, the number one priority, and you'll hear more about that this morning. This is one of 10 ILW forums over these 3 days as we try to educate not only the public, but also the military at large. This particular panel is so important to our Army. My name is George Cohen. Did 30 years in the Army. I've got 5 kids in the military. That's a labor of love for me, and I couldn't think of a better forum to be in than this talent management. We can't do this alone. Your membership with AUSA is vitally important. For those of you that have and that currently are an AUSA member, we'd like to recognize you. So please stand so we can give you a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. For those of you that are not, we would love for you. There's a quid pro quo here. For those of you, booth 307 on the floor, you can sign up down there, or you can go to the AUSA website. So we would really appreciate strength in numbers. So thank you very much. Again, dynamite panel, and I'm going to turn it over to General Siemens. Sir, over to you.
George, thank you very much. Thanks for your 30 years of service, being a soldier for life. And the things that we're going to talk about this morning are going to impact your 5 children in the service. So thanks for the great introduction. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to the Contemporary Military Forum, Army Talent Management in 2028. For those of you who are out of town, I'd like to welcome you to Washington, D.C., home of the National League champions, soon to be World Series champions. Sorry, I think the Nats have been listening because winning matters. Talent management is so critical to our priority of people for a number of reasons. I would submit to you that talent management gives every one of our soldiers the ability to be the best version of themselves. It also allows our units to build readiness as we get the right people in the right job at the right time, recognizing their talents. We have a terrific lineup of panelists this morning. We're going to be talking about a very relevant, important topic of talent management, how the Army manages its people. My name is Tom Siemens, and I have the honor of serving as your G1, and I'll be the moderator for this morning's panel. I'd like to start by showing a video on the necessity, why we need talent management in the Army, and following the video, the 40th Chief of Staff of the Army, General McConville, will provide some opening comments for the forum. Let's go to the video, please.
The foundation of the Army's ability to dominate in land combat depends on our skill to attract and manage the best talent, giving us a decisive advantage over future adversaries. Talent management encompasses acquiring, developing, employing, and retaining the Army's greatest asset, its people, to enhance readiness by maximizing human potential. The Army is moving out rapidly in 4 areas. First, the Army talent alignment process matches officers to assignments. This process empowers commanders and individuals to play a more active role in the assignment process. Second, we are building a culture of assessments. Talent assessments provide a common lens through which to identify an officer's knowledge, skills, and behaviors. Assessments provide the Army with better information for development, assignment, promotion, and selection decisions. Third, we are developing options that enable officers to have flexible career paths. Last, we are significantly modernizing the way we promote and select officers. Great organizations have the ability to make predictions about the future and enact the necessary changes before they're needed. Applying a soldier's talents where they're needed most gives the Army the agility to meet the challenges of 21st century warfare. The Army talent management approach will maximize the potential of the Army's greatest strength, its people.
Ladies and gentlemen, the 40th Chief of Staff of the Army, General McConville.
Well, hey, thanks, Tom. And Hey, thanks for letting me crash this panel. I wasn't supposed to speak today, but if you haven't heard me talk about talent management and people, I just want to get a chance to open this panel up, and then I'm going to get off the stage and get to these experts. But, you know, people are the #1 priority for me in the Army. #1 priority. That's why we need to manage their talent. And it's extremely important. And it's a philosophical approach to how we run the Army. We equip people. We don't man equipment. Think about that. We equip our soldiers. We don't man. It's all about the soldier. #1 priority. And so when it comes to talent management, in the future, we're going to have to compete for young men and women's talent. And that's what this is all about. We are in an information age, so we cannot be an industrial age Army. And so some of the things we're putting in place are going to recognize our soldiers, our civilians, their talents. It's knowledge, skills, and behaviors, and even preferences. And a lot of people in the Army, when we start talking about preferences, they get a little excited, especially some of the older folks. Like, you know, if the Army wanted you to do something, we would have given it to you. But I believe that if we know where people want to go and what they want to do, and we get them into those positions, we will have a much better Army. And we will, because winning matters. And don't forget that either. Winning does matter. And so the programs we're putting in place are going to take some time. This is going to change culture. You know, I learned a lot about this when I was a recovering G1. I didn't know anything about the personnel system. I knew nothing about the personnel system. I came out of Division Command, and I started looking at our processes. And what our great personnel management was doing is they were doing the best they could with what they had, the system they had in place. And they did extremely well. But I learned along the way that, first of all, that we had 3 different personnel systems. Think about that. You know, we're a total force, but we have a personnel system for the regular Army, a personnel system for the National Guard, and a personnel system for the Reserve. So if you think about it, it's kind of like during the Civil War where we had different gauge railroads. So when you went from state to state, what would happen is you'd get to the state border, you would take all the cargo, you'd unload it, you'd break it, lose it, and then you put it onto the other train and you'd move out. Very inefficient and very ineffective. That is what happens to our Reserve and Guard soldiers right now. How many Guard and Reserve we have out there? Is that true? Pay gets messed up, personnel rate. So we want everyone on the same system, okay? And so we're doing that with the integrated personnel and pay system. The second thing I learned this when I was a 1-star in Afghanistan. I learned that we basically manage our soldiers by 2 variables. You're a captain of infantry. You're a sergeant of engineers. And what I found out was I was in Afghanistan. A guy named Millie McConville. We were 2 1-stars in the 101st Airborne Division. You might have heard that other guy, right? And we were given the mission to go ahead and surge in Afghanistan and build out all the forward operating bases. And I had some great Guard and Reserve units there. And so I asked them, because we were in the industrial age, maybe the agricultural age, to fill out an Excel spreadsheet on what their talents were, what they did in real life. And I found out I had a supply sergeant that ran an engineering design firm and was an engineering designer. That sergeant is the one that designed all the bases in Afghanistan for the surge. That sergeant, okay? I learned I had a major that worked for the Texas Highway Department. And that major helped us build highways. And if you notice, I'm from Boston, okay? Socks on in, we're kind of hurting about that. But I'm from Boston, okay? And we don't have a whole lot of farms in Boston. We have pictures of farms, but we don't have a whole lot of farms. And when I found out, I had some great professional farmers from Nebraska and Iowa, and they stood up these agribusiness development teams. My takeaway was we had this incredible talent in the Army that I couldn't see, because it was almost masked by the MOS in the grade. And I go, and we got to find that. That's why we're going to knowledge, skills, behavior, and preferences, because we want to manage people by about 25 variables. So you can tell us what your talents are. and then we can match them up with the job. And we think we get that matched up, that's gonna change things. We think we need to assess, and we need to compete for our soldiers, non-commissioned officers, and officers' talents. We need to compete for the best. Let's not find out who shows up. You know, I've read a lot on talent management, bleeding talent, and everything else, and people talked about 50% of the captains are leaving. Okay, well, 50% of the captains have to leave. That's just, by physics, because but here's the deal. Who's staying? And how do we compete for those captains with the most talent? And we have to compete for them. Let's not just see who shows up. Let's compete for them. Only about 30% of officers need to stay 20 years. Only 15% of enlisted soldiers need to stay 20 years. That's all we have space for. But let's compete for the talents. Let's go for the best. Let's go for the diversity that represents the diversity of the United States, and let's go after those folks and do it early on. The other thing you're going to see coming up we're going to talk about is, just from where I sit, is I look at battalion commanders and sergeant majors as one of the most consequential jobs in the United States Army. And so we're going to implement a battalion commanders assessment program that's going to fundamentally transform the way we pick battalion commanders. Some people are going to like it. Some people are not going to like it. You're going to compete for those positions. You'll go through a process where you'll be screened by a board, and they'll take a look at your past performance, and you'll get so much percentage for that. And then you'll come to Fort Knox, and you'll try out a 5-day assessment. And some people go, well, wait a minute, what about all this stuff? This is hard, this is whatever it is. Well, I look at it and see right now we spend more time and money on picking an enlisted soldier in the Ranger Battalion than we do on picking battalion commanders. So we're going to change that. And what's going to change is, right now we look at a officer's record for about 2.5 minutes to pick battalion commanders. And if someone slipped on a block or someone didn't have a profile, they may not have the opportunity that they deserve based on their talents. So they have a chance to compete. So, as we take a look in the future, we're going to become an information age Army. And it's not going to be necessarily linear. It's not going to be industrial. And all these type things that are coming in place are going to allow us to be and retain being the greatest Army on earth. So I'm going to turn over to the folks that are actually working these things. Again, for me, people first. Winning matters. We remain Army strong. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, sir. You can tell from the turnout today that talent management matters, and there's a lot of interest and focus on it. If you Google the words talent management, you'll get 690 million hits. So to put it a different way, if you were to spend a minute on each one of those websites, it would take you 41 billion minutes, 28 million days, but we don't have time for that. Fortunately, we have a great panel that's going to distill all that down into what it means for the Army to attract and retain the talent in 2028. We'll first hear from our panelists and then proceed into a question and answer portion. Can you put up the slide with the panel and the place to text? There we go. This is the panel, but more importantly not more importantly, I guess, but in the bottom right-hand corner, when we open it for questions and answers, you can text the word Army Talent, one word, to 21000, 21000, and you'll receive a welcome message. Following the message, you can submit any question, and we'll bring the questions up front. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce our panelists. To my right, your left, Major General J.P. McGee, who leads the Army's talent management efforts as the director of the Army Talent Management Task Force. He will discuss organizational reform and cultural change to adapt to the future. Hua? Next to JP is Dr. Lenny Wong, the research professor of military strategy at the U.S. Army War College, and he'll discuss organizational reform, cultural change to adapt to the future. Hua, Lenny, thanks for coming. Next is Major General Joe Calloway, the Commanding General of Human Resources Command. He will provide a look into how we're implementing change in talent management at the Human Resources Command. Next is Sergeant Major Wardell Jefferson, my Sergeant Major for the G1. He'll help us better understand enlisted talent management. Hua. And completing the panel is Ms. Charlene Thomas, who is the Chief Human Resources Officer for United Parcel Service, UPS. UPS is a company that has become an employer of rewards, opportunities, achievement, and an employer of choice. The company's nationally recognized human resources initiatives focus on the idea of keeping the reputation of being the best package delivery company in the business. She has a unique perspective on industry best practices for human resources and UPS's innovative approach to managing its global workforce. Now we'll walk down the panel and provide 5 to 8 minutes each to talk about your areas of expertise. JP?
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending. I'd like to first start off talking about, our approach and how we view 2028 and what that looks like for talent management. I'm going to talk about how some of the initiatives we're doing today drive us to that future end state. I'd like to end it with a scenario to sort of have you start to have a vision of how we can bring this all together and what this means for the warfighting capabilities of the Army. So you'll hear the Chief talk about it. We talk a lot about this transition from industrial era practices to information age. But what that actually really means is you've got to understand the underpinning and the logic of each of those approaches. So, the industrial age was great until we had something a little bit better, but that really went with these sort of principles. It says an institution or organization needs to bring people in, needs to get them to a minimum acceptable level of competency, and then effectively you can employ them across the entire enterprise because they're all sort of good enough and the same. So an infantry captain's the same across the board and you can apply them. And if there's any sort of uniqueness, it's done on the margins and on the wings, and it doesn't really apply to the vast majority. It was the best approach that we had if we weren't enabled by information technology and we didn't know a lot about our people because we couldn't process all that information. It's encapsulated with the 2 key legislative documents that still run the way that we manage our officer corps, the 1947 Officer Personnel Act and the 1980 Defense Officer Personnel Management Act, which has been significantly changed, just last year with the 2019 NDAA. But if you take an information-aged approach, you say something different. You say you bring people into your organization, you start to find out what is unique about them, what we call talents, that unique combination of knowledge, skills, behaviors, and preferences. And yes, preferences are really important in terms of how we manage our people. And then you take that knowledge to develop the individuals and then employ them most effectively to contribute to the mission of your organization. You can do that today because you have to be enabled by new information technology that lets you take large cohorts of people, say for the active duty officer corps, that's 90,000 people, and be able to manage them uniquely. And what you'll see is a collective lift, not just with like the top 5%, but across the entire organization as people are developed in a more unique fashion and then employed in a way where they can actually contribute in the maximum fashion towards the mission. It's a movement from performance management to talent management as we start moving forward. It's a movement that focuses on longer-term readiness in terms of the retention of the right talents that we need to have in the future to succeed instead of worrying about short-term readiness, which is really focused on making sure you've got a slot filled. It's about moving from a data-poor environment where you don't have much information about your officer corps to having a data-rich environment where you can make much better decisions, not just for the individual, but institutionally. We know each other and we're data-driven, and we're using that data that we collect over time to drive decisions from the individual to the institution. It's where these things like knowledge, skills, behaviors, and preferences, what we define as a talent, come into play. It's about moving from an old information technology systems that we have right now to an investment in a future information technology system that can handle all of this and then also provides us a predictive capability so we can start modeling and simulating and seeing what the decisions that we make today, how that impacts our future. It's a movement from rigid career paths where everybody has to stay on a fairly standardized model to flexible career paths. And it's also discussing and trying to get after a better alignment of the management organization and processes to make sure that we maintain the strategic direction for our people across the Army. Some of the initiatives, and I won't go into great detail, but I'll just talk broadly how they start moving us in that direction as an Army as we start building momentum and change. So one of the first things we're going to talk about is the Army Talent Alignment process, which is the new way in which we assign officers across the active component. So what that gives us now is increased transparency for all the jobs that are available. We get a tremendous amount of knowledge boost in terms of the information we have about each officer as they self-describe themselves on the backside of the ORB. And as an Army, we start getting this information about what is unique about a position and an individual, and we start seeing over time what those trends are. What are the knowledge, skills, and behaviors of really successful battalion S3s? What is sort of unique about a particular job that allows us, that we need to be looked for? And you start having a queryable database and we're going to be able to use that information. The chief already mentioned the Battalion Commander Assessment Program, but really that's a bold step forward in terms of starting to add assessments, which are these objective measurements of people, into the whole management, as opposed to solely a subjective evaluation on an OER. Not that that's not always going to be central and important, but it's not the only thing that's going to determine how we develop, employ our people. We talk about bringing in, through direct commissioning, officers into the Army so they can take the skills and the strength of our nation in many of these fields and apply it to our warfighting mission as an Army. So as we go into this, this very uncertain and complex future operational environment, we have the strength of the nation, contributing to our mission. We talk about being able to opt out of promotion boards as a first step to be able to opt into promotion boards as a measure to establish more flexibility and more ownership for an officer of how they manage their career. We're moving forward with this idea of brevet promotion, so we can recognize those who are uniquely talented and elevate them into a position, and then they get promoted as soon as they're picked for that position. 770 slots from colonel to captain given to us. And then we talk about having merit-based promotion lists in terms of how we execute and sequence our promotion lists, as opposed to reverting back to just the date of rank. So in 2028, which is the focus of this, what does that all look like? We created an illustrative scenario, and I'll tell you what I think this potentially could look like for the Army as we face a future challenge. So in 2028, a geopolitical crisis erupts. It demands a proportional and tailored response for the Army. Leveraging big data through AI-enabled systems, advanced predictive analytics now allow Army senior leaders to select a targeted force structure tailored for this region. Army data and system engineers directly commissioned in the Army, because their specialized civilian expertise, runs thousands of simulations on potential plans to pick the best approach for the crisis. Crowdsourcing through Army academic networks comprised of thousands of part-time civilian PhDs in unique fields help shape policy recommendations for senior leaders and strategic decision makers. Simultaneously, people operations specialists immediately assess the KSBs of tens of thousands of soldiers in IPS-A to fill a joint task force with critical abilities in UAV swarm management, disaster relief response, tailored regional languages, and advanced power generation. Led by officers groomed through succession planning for key leadership positions, this JTF harnesses the talents of officers, non-commissioned officers, and civilian from the Guard, Reserve, and active components. We receive world-class material and deployment support as a consequence. If this scenario sounds complex, it's because the future of warfare will be characterized by dynamic change, unavoidable uncertainty, and increasingly ambiguous scenarios. So there you go. That is my shot to make personal management sound exciting and sexy.
Lenny?
It's a great day for Army talent management reform. I mean, when you look at things, what more could you ask for? The Congress signaled its attitude when it said it's time to modernize the 38-year-old officer personnel system. Department of Defense signaled it's going to provide reinforcing fires in the National Defense Strategy when they said it's time for a broad revision of talent management in the armed services. The Secretary of Defense, when he was the Secretary of the Army, said talent management is his #1 priority. The Secretary of the Army backs it 100%. The Chief of Staff of the Army was a former G1 and is a big advocate for talent management. Casey Wardinsky, one of the early champions of talent management, is now the ASA and MNRA. The Army Talent Management Task Force has been reinvigorated and capably led. What more could you ask? The conditions have been set. Never has there been a time with greater potential for major transformational change in the officer career management system in the Army than today. So what could possibly hinder this historic and profound occasion? Well, the answer is, unfortunately, the Army culture. And so the Army culture consists of those discrete things that influence decision-making, that quietly affect our behavior that we never speak about, those norms and beliefs. And unfortunately, it's the Army culture that will drag its feet when Army transformation in talent management is attempted. Well, probably the first cultural line of defense that we'll see approaching talent management is for that matter, it's always the first line of defense for any transformational change, and that is the perspective of, if it's not broken, why bother fixing it? And what that causes is, it causes us to ask senior leaders to acknowledge that the system that chose them for success, that selected them as exemplars of success, that placed in their hands the stewardship of the profession, That system is somehow flawed and needs to be overhauled. So it's perfectly rational for senior leaders to say to themselves, it makes no sense to go chasing a corporate fad and risk damaging the system that, while it's not perfect, is good enough. So this aspect of Army culture encourages uniformed leaders to patiently wait out those civilian zealots, hoping that despite all the high expectations of reform, only non-threatening initiatives like longer maternity leave, expanded childcare hours, and more mothers' rooms will result. Another factor that will impede talent management reform is the Army's egalitarian nature. The Army prides itself on being the service that leaves no one behind, that treats everyone the same regardless of individual differences. So it was egalitarianism that pushes back hard against offering opportunities to high potential individuals while denying those opportunities to those with lesser talent. So it was egalitarianism that in 2004 said, let's send all majors to resident ILE instead of just the top 50%. It was egalitarianism in the FY07 captain's exodus crisis that said, let's offer a retention bonus to all captains, regardless of their record of performance and future potential. And it will be egalitarianism that goes against talent reform when an initiative will highlight a talent shortfall in a particular branch, a source of commission, a subgroup, or a subpopulation. Another odd aspect of the Army's culture that will push back against talent reform is loyalty. Army senior leaders are exceptionally loyal to their subordinates, especially those with whom they have served and sacrificed alongside in 18 years of war. There's a well-intentioned and totally understandable concern that altering the paths of success for these young warriors midstream in their career is essentially pulling the rug from out under them. That potent cultural norm of loyalty encourages the belief that maybe it's better to err in a way that honors their service, even if it ultimately inhibits the effectiveness of talent management reform. And the fourth aspect of Army culture that will impede talent management reform, which is very popular across the entire Army, is skepticism. I specialize in this. It's just part of the Army culture, especially when personnel issues are concerned. We've all heard the promises. We've all watched to see if the walk matches the talk. We've heard the promises, and that's what the force has heard. They've heard the promises that a command in a training unit is on par with a command in a tactical unit. We've heard the promises that a tour as a MIT team advisor is career enhancing. The force is skeptical. And so when promotion results, when selection results finally match up the promises of talent management reform, then the force will believe it. But until then, they remain skeptical and cynical. Finally, the Army rests on a foundation that extols the preeminence of the warfighter. From lessons learned in pre-commissioning, where order of merit is largely determined by PT results and platoon patrolling scores, to general officers bragging that they never served a day in the Pentagon, the warfighter is extolled and emulated. And this key component of the Army culture is often intimidating, but it's often underestimated in realizing how much it pushes back against reform. But unless the preeminence of the warfighter is preserved, the force will always be skeptical. And they will look askance at any talent management initiatives that try to put the right person in the right place at the right time. So how does talent management reform succeed in the Army without these foot-dragging effects of Army culture? Well, it begins with reform being embraced, owned, and promoted by uniformed senior leaders. The mantle of transformation that right now rests on the shoulders of the civilian appointees has to be shifted onto the shoulders of uniformed senior leaders. There has to be open discussion about how the world's greatest Army shouldn't put people into positions by making a phone call to an assignment officer, HRC. We have to really confront the fact that is the best Army in the world assessing its people by spending 2.5 minutes glancing at a photo in ORB and looking for code words in OERs. We have to have those hard discussions, and we have to ask ourselves, is it time? Because transformation is best executed when it comes from within. Uniformed senior leaders have to be convinced, and they have to convince themselves, that change is not only necessary, but feasible and desired. On the other hand, talent reformers have to recognize the uniqueness of Army culture that makes the Army what it is. The Army's primary function is to fight the nation's wars and win the nation's wars. So it is only logical to retain the essence of the warfighter culture. The 1997 OPMS 21 study recognized this and created the operations career field, which made career paths, albeit too narrow career paths, for warfighters. So today, talent management advocates have to face the fact that the force of tomorrow will still have to be run by warfighters who have not forgotten who soldiers are and what the nation demands of them. But by the same token, if warfighters are going to assume the bulk of the leadership positions, senior leadership positions in the Army, they cannot object. Matter of fact, they should desire to be sent off to graduate school, fellowships, and non-muddy boot broadening assignments. And they can't redefine broadening to include becoming an OC at the CTCs. Part of talent management reform is not only making sure we have the best warfighters, but also that we have leaders that can lead this enterprise. Finally, in order to address the distrust that the force has of all talent management reform, it's imperative that reform be transparent as possible. We need to know why AIM 2, now we won't get into that. Simulation should be run to project short-term and long-term implications. Pilot tests should be run across the Army so we could adjust initiatives. And if we spot a talent shortfall in a particular branch, particular source of commission, a particular subgroup, then we shouldn't discard the initiative, but we should go to look and see why is there a talent shortfall and work to correct that instead of just throwing out every initiative. In rolling out talent management initiatives and reform, the force must be convinced that the policies, while not necessarily treating everyone the same, that they're reasonable, that they're fair, and that they're in the best interest of the nation, the Army, and the soldier. So in my short remarks today, I'm not trying to come up with any new directives or directions we should go or new initiatives. My point is just that as an Army, we have a history of ignoring culture. And that today, the stage has been set. The key actors are in position to bring about a radical transformation in the Army. We should not squander this rare opportunity by failing to recognize and adjust to the pervasiveness of Army culture. Thanks.
Thanks, Lenny. I appreciate it. Joe?
Good morning, everybody. It's an honor to be here and appreciate the chance to talk to you a little bit about this. So Dr. Wong mentioned distrust and skepticism. So, here I am, the HRC commander, and I'm frankly a little concerned that we've got the father of green pages in the front row, the father of OPMS 21 in the second row, and our British colleagues in the front row on my left. And I'm somehow the only guy with this mystery bag in front of him, which I'm a little bit afraid to touch, and I'm thinking someone's eventually going to light this on fire and ask me to put it out. So anyway, the people strategy was signed by the Secretary, the Chief, and the Sergeant Major of the Army late last week. Who has read that strategy? All right, so we have a couple. Well, guess what? Thanks, sir. Chief read it, so you guys need to get on it. But I think the people strategy is actually an excellent backdrop for this conversation today, because it talks about the strategic threat environment. And that strategic threat environment has China and Russia investing considerably in both technology and equipment to reduce our advantage and to close the gap of the advantage that we've had for as long as any of us have been in the Army. And so our people are our largest strategic asset, and that's where we've got to invest if we're going to keep our advantage, period. I mean, that is just what it is. Again, you guys, whether you're a brigade commander or a young captain or a major, you're the people that are going to embrace this, and you're the people that are going to make it happen, because equipment doesn't learn and innovate. Equipment doesn't think and lead through ambiguity. Equipment doesn't change a culture from internal to an organization and set up a culture of trust and judgment to build cohesive teams. It also doesn't exercise judgment. That's you guys. That's us. And so we have got to evolve to maximize the talent that is resident in the folks sitting in this room and everywhere else across all components and over time. And so it's a pretty exciting time to be the HRC commander because I'm the guy that's, or our team, not me, but our team is going to execute a lot of the things that JP talked about earlier. Let's talk just about a couple of those. So 30 or 40 years, how long have we had the same promotion system and the same way that we select officers for battalion command? It's been the same since I've been in the Army. I think since General Siemens has been in the Army. That's only a couple of years longer. I didn't want to age my boss out here. Merit-based promotions. We've gone from taking the person who gets promoted first simply because they've been around the longest to now we're going to promote the person first who actually a board judge had the most talent and had performed the best. BCAP, the chief talked about BCAP. We're going to do the same not only on the officer side in terms of OML-based promotions, and I'll let Sergeant Major Jefferson, he'll talk a little bit here about what we're going to do on the enlisted side. We've also done direct commissioning for our, John Hersey's here, for our cyber force. So we've got these authorities, and now for the first time we've got the authority given to us by Congress to assess people directly to a rank up to the rank of colonel. Now, is that going to happen very frequently? No, but there may be unique one-off situations where we do that. But certainly, with skills like our cyber force, you're going to have to bring people in at the grade of captain or so to get the right skill set that you need to execute those sorts of missions. So for the first time, we talked about opt-out. So the February, anybody going to be in the eligible for the Lieutenant Colonel's Board that will meet in February? Not a single person.
Couple people
All right.
over there.
We got one. All right, congratulations. You're going to be the first person in recorded history to have the opportunity to opt out of that promotion board. And why is that important? Again, it gets back to people having the opportunity to pursue their passions and do what they care about. So you may have a unique situation where an officer would like to be an infantry battalion or brigade commander, but would also like to go develop a skill or get a PhD in data analytics at MIT, and they want to fit that into their timeline. So you will have those sorts of opportunities that you haven't had in the past. And although assignment information module, again, we're changing the way we manage assignments and the way we manage officers. So again, to the chief's point, that everybody is not an interchangeable part. And so that opened, AIM opened on Friday, and today we have, or as of this morning, 5,900 officers have put in preferences out of the 14,000 that are moving. Among those 5,900 officers who have input preferences, we've got 152,000 individual preferences about where they say they want to go. Why is that? And on the opposite side of that, units are going to have the opportunity to influence who comes to their formation for the first time. Are they going to control it 100%? No, of course not. And so I get the question all the time, well, what about readiness? How are we going to ensure that we maintain readiness and still do this? Are we going to walk away from our responsibility to develop leaders who can lead combat formations in combat? No. We are still going to meet readiness requirements regardless, because we don't have a choice. We have to do that. So moving forward, and I'm sure we'll have plenty of questions about AIM, so I won't beat the AIM thing to death, and look forward to your questions on AIM. We also have to develop laws and policies that allow greater permeability between service components, and maybe not only just service components, but how about between our civilian workforce and a military career? Something that we really haven't had, and it's just way too difficult to do it under the current system. So we have to develop, we're sort of at the nascent end of this, and we have to develop the analytics and the data needed to do this a little bit better. So, predictive assessments, diagnostic assessments, and again, you can read this. We just don't have those tools right now. So we need all these things. Why? You need that to enable talent management, obviously. We've got to acquire the right soldiers. we've got to develop the right soldiers, effectively employ the right soldiers, and then we've got to retain, to the chief's point. Every organization loses talent, and there's no getting around that. But we do have to find a way that we keep the best 80% or 90% of the top 20 or 25%, or whatever that turns out to be. And that's our charter as far as moving forward with this. And so our tool to do that, a tool of the future is IPSA. And I think the timing of IPSA in line of effort 3 fielding in December 21 actually nests nicely with where we're going in terms of JP and his team developing the assessments we sort of need, figuring out longer term what sort of data analytics we require to do that. And so we'll move forward in doing all that. So IPSA's coming, and again, I'm sure there's probably IPSA-related questions on this as well. But the goal ultimately is that we've got to evolve the way we assign officers, the way we assign our enlisted force, and evolve our assignment officers into talent managers. So our talent managers are not just calling you up like maybe they did when I was growing up and said, hey, you have the choice of 1 or 2. And that's evolved over time to, hey, we looked at your file and you have the choice of 1 through 7 based on what we see in your file. To a talent, not an assignment officer, but a talent manager who can say, hey, I know you went into AIM, here's my advice, here's what I know about you, and not just manage your next assignment, but manage you 5, 6, 7 years out, 10 years out, and manage your assignments over time so that you've got some sort of predictive path. Maybe you want to be an infantry officer initially, but your talent manager at HRC says, hey, you actually, based on the assessments in the system, you may be one of the people that we want to VTIP early to become a cyber officer, or to become an AUSA, or whatever the case may be. You don't have to wait to year 8 to pursue your passion like you do now. So again, we've got to evolve what they, and then over time, the HRC talent manager should be linked with the colonel's management assignment officer or talent manager should be linked with GOMO, so that we've got across time and space the ability to see the force. But again, it's a nascent capability now. We're developing the data we have and that we need actually to make those decisions over time. So getting there will require improved analytics. So we look forward to your questions on AIM. Honored to be here in talent management, and look forward to your questions. Sorry, Major.
Thanks, Joe. I think the bag's okay to touch, so if you want to.
We'll see.
Sergeant Major,
after the questions, sir.
Sergeant Major, over to you.
Well, good morning. I hope everybody's been paying attention and listening to what everybody said. And if that's the case, all you have to do is take what they said, replace officer with NCO or soldier, and my job is done here. So basically, on a serious note, this is a very important topic. We talk about it very often. A lot of us don't truly understand what talent management is or what it truly means to the readiness of our force. So it's imperative that we continue to have these discussions and we look at ways to improve the way we manage our soldiers. We have a very talented force, and there's a lot of information that is out there about our soldiers and our workforce in general that we don't know and we can't see in the personnel systems that we have today. So as we evolve and we continue to implement IPSA and field it throughout our total force, and that includes the reserves and National Guards, man, it's going to give us the opportunity to get that type of information from soldiers that we would otherwise not know. The other way that we get that is having open dialogue with our soldiers. In a panel yesterday with the Sergeant Major of the Army, we talked about doing face-to-face discussions with our soldiers. That's kind of a lost art right now. We have relied on text messaging, emails, and things like that, and we don't truly talk to our soldiers. So if you don't have a face-to-face discussion with your soldiers, you're not going to be able to get that information, and they're not going to open up and share information with you that you would not know. So that is one of the things that we are really trying to focus on with our mid-grade NCOs and then developing them. So there's a lot of initiatives that are going on formally right now. Yes, we are working on officer talent management because that is what we are doing formally. They're running a test, but the thing is, the beauty of it is that the enlisted force, majority of our stuff is covered by policy, and it's easier to change policy than laws. So in conjunction with what General McGee and his team are doing, the Sergeant Major of the Army and his Senior Enlisted Council are working ways to improve the way we manage our enlisted force. And the major change that we made recently was the NCO Evaluation Board. As General Callaway talked about, we went away from promoting individuals based on seniority and now promoting them based on their merit. And that is crucial because often we promote people, but are we really promoting the right people? Just because they're senior does not mean they have more experience and they have better skills and things like that to bring to the table. So what we're doing is basically looking at those records and reviewing them and truly diving in and trying to ensure that we promote the right person to lead our formations. Some of the initiatives that we're looking at that we talked about was the mid-level NCOs, staff sergeants primarily. One of the things the Sergeant Major of the Army has us looking at right now is how can we better develop our staff sergeants. And in my own opinion, I always thought the officers did it right. All right, but then again, we got to look at the inventory. So the inventory on the enlisted side, on the active component, you have about 400,000 enlisted soldiers. When you look at HRC, the Human Resources Command, those assignment managers, on average, they manage about 2,500 individuals by themselves. So it's kind of hard to get to that level of talent management with the personnel systems that we have today. So with the implementation of IPSA, it's going to assist that, as well as some hard work that has been done at HRC over the past couple years and developing a manner of performance tool and things like that for our enlisted soldiers, and being given the authority to receive data from the centralized promotion boards that can pretty much tell them where individuals placed amongst their peers if they were not selected for that board. So all these things are going to assist us with better managing our soldiers. Now, the staff sergeants. Right now, especially within FORSCOM units, you know, you have a sergeant promotable that gets promoted to staff sergeant, and that individual leaves your formation almost immediately, going off to be a drill sergeant or recruiter. So what we're trying to look at is possibly, once that individual gets promoted to staff sergeant, we stabilize them in your formation and allow you to get them in those key and developmental experience jobs, so that when they go off to be a drill sergeant or recruiter, they've already met their core competencies within their career management field. This will assist with better developing those NCOs. We do it with our captains right now. They stay a captain for a pretty long period of time, but during that time, they're getting developed so that when they go out and they have to lead soldiers, they're prepared to do that. Right now, our staff sergeants, not all of them, but majority of them are not ready to do that. So we have to do a better job at preparing them. The other thing that we did as far as assessing soldiers, we developed the occupational fitness assessment test. And that right there, I mean physical assessment test, and that right there is testing those individuals' physical abilities to perform the duties that they need to do within the job that they want to sign up for. So that's going to assist. The other thing that we're looking at is an NCO special assignment battery test. What that's going to do is that's going to test individuals' abilities and see where they're better served, whether maybe in the future they become a drill sergeant, or no, based off of their test results or their assessment, they need to go be a recruiter. Because right now, we're doing some deep dives and screening to select individuals to go out and do these special duties, but is the current way that we're doing it the right way? Is that the most effective way? We don't know. So we have to find ways to do this. The other thing is developing our KSBs, knowledge, skills, and behaviors. We have to, individuals, as soldiers, you have to seek self-development. You have to go out and you have to improve your skills every day, whether it be on the job, if it's in a classroom, or whatever it may be. And a mentor. Mentor is very key to what we do these days. So you have to look at all those elements. The other thing is, when we're doing that, we're looking at the organizations to provide us what KSBs are required by them for individuals to come perform those duties within their organizations. On the officer side, they have the enlisted marketplace under AIM 2, and they're matching individuals to organizations based off KSBs. In the future, we're looking to do that for the enlisted force as well. HRC has used ASK, the assignment satisfaction key for years, but they are currently right now working on ways to improve that, and they're running a pilot with 19 deltas and 19 kilos to have like an enlisted marketplace. As we continue to evolve, that's going to open up to more CMFs throughout this pilot, and hopefully by 2021 it'll be open up to all CMFs. So there's a lot of positive stuff going on. The other thing is KD stabilization is being piloted right now as well. So a lot of your formations out there right now are currently going through a KD stabilization when they're leaving staff sergeants or NCOs in your formations long enough for them to get KD qualified. And it's 36 months right now. But if you come on a patch chart for deployment or whatever, there's a possibility you may be able to retain those individuals longer. But at the end of the day, we have to remember, we have to have a well-rounded soldiers, and we have to feed our trade arc formation as well, because as we're assessing soldiers, you know, USAREC is assessing a lot of soldiers. We have to have great NCOs to go out and train those individuals and bring them into our formations as well. So I know I talked about a lot. We can go on forever talking about this, but I'm going to pass it over. But I look forward to your questions, and I hope that we can have a healthy discussion this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Sergeant Major. Ms. Thomas, thanks for coming in.
Well, first I'd like to thank all enlisted, active, and retired for the opportunity to be here. It is not, I take it lightly, being here in the presence of the Army, that you provide the protection for us to be able to do our job. So I'd like to thank you all for your service. And on behalf of my CEO, Dave Abney, I thank you for the privilege to speak with you this morning. I do want to give you a little bit of background on UPS and kind of really talk about really the shared culture that UPS has, which is very similar with the Army as well as the Armed Forces. First, UPS is a 112-year-old organization. I know the Army is much older, but I do think for some in the room, it can kind of set the platform for really where we are as an organization and how really it aligns with where Army wants to go with talent management. I must thank Major McGee for inviting me to be here. I happened to meet him on a JCOC experience this summer. I was truly engaged by what the Army was doing, was letting him know, wow, this is so familiar. Even though I'm not at work, I feel like I'm at work. I also would like to acknowledge two of my coworkers that were with me. I have both a retiree, Ray Thompson, here from the U.S. Army, as well as my HR coordinator, Stefan Harris, is here to not only support, but also to take back some best practices. But we'd like to share kind of where we are on our journey and really encourage you with some of the same kind of struggles we are having with our organization when it comes to talent management. Yes, we are in a war for talent management. Yes, people are everyone's most valuable asset. You will see that now people coming have a lot of demands coming right in the door. They want top pay, they want immediate flexibilities, and they want to be able to know where they're going to be 2, 3, 5 years from now with their organization. So our organization has taken a look at really where we want to be. And in 2017, we started on our organizational and enterprise transformation. And currently, our HR function is in a transformation. And why did we do it? We're doing it for talent acquisition, talent management, and talent retention. All of familiar things that you're talking about today. And really, what we needed to do and what is always what organizations want to do is they want to reduce all of the manual, mundane activities that keep us from developing our people. So we are actually outsourcing some of our activities that are not providing our HR professionals the ability to be consultants, to be strategists, to really talk about how do we evaluate people, how do we take advantage of using either partnerships or engagements to advance our people throughout our organization and make sure they are engaged, they are inspired, and they want to work. So I want to just kind of partner on something that you all are mentioning as far as your people first. We just adopted a new strategy which starts with customer first. We then go with people-led and innovation-driven. And really the innovation of an outsource and a new operating platform through our HR transformation is going to enable us to have strategic analytic tools that our HR professionals will be using in 2021 to really advise our leaders, which you all have different battalions. We actually have divisions and districts to which we deliver our services that we will now enable them to identify who do they want to go after based on what geography talent is available, what kind of rewards are they looking for, And then really, what kind of experiences can we provide in our organization that will mirror their aspirations to make sure we're attracting the right people at the right time and giving them the right rewards and incentives to stay with us. We also are taking advantage of really leveraging our culture. We serve in over 220 countries and territories worldwide, and we have over 481,000 people. So we're very similar in size and scope to the U.S. Army as well as some of the other armed forces. We are taking advantage of the fact that we did a culture survey just recently to make sure that our people that are actively with us, do they understand how to serve our customers? And if they don't, what do we have to do different to make sure they can do that? And then we're taking an opportunity to say, look, do they feel led? Because we really need to feel and understand where our people, where we're missing their needs. And then we have to make sure we're providing the innovative tools that they need to succeed and achieve on their job. So we have just completed our culture survey. We are now using those analytical data as well as the feedback we will be sharing with all of our global leaders, and we will use our leadership framework, which is really the behaviors that we want leaders to have to really use as an ongoing basis the things that they're going to need to do to improve the work environment, meet the needs of our people, exceed the expectations of our customers, and make sure that we're using technology solutions to differentiate ourselves from our competition when it comes to providing services. So we are using that culture survey as a way to make sure that our people have a dynamic way of communicating what they need, and more importantly, we can then respond and then give them what they need on a mobile basis. So we will be able to give that to them through an app, so their leaders will be able to do that in formal meetings as well as they can do it individually. And we want to make sure that when they take advantage of this, that we have now a record. So we know what they worked on, we can see how they're working on it, and we can share it across the globe. Because one of the things you realize is that when you are in a large organization, you may have units that are functioning very well, but the transparency to know if it's working here, it could easily work somewhere else. So we're taking that app and that knowledge and we're using that to share across the enterprise so that, hey, if I'm having a problem with an area and someone else has that same problem but has solved it, I don't have to continue to not have work performance or have apathy. I can definitely get to that answer. A couple questions were posed to me that I'd like to tackle here, just to talk about really what we want to do to differentiate ourselves with our people. We know that this generation of folks are really into our communities, and they're really seeing really what the moral and emotional attachment is to the brand. And I think the Army, with the brand that you have, people want to be attached to your brand. So we first want people to know how philanthropic we are. We gave over $115 million last year across our organization, and we did over $25 million in charities. We also want our people to serve their communities because, again, we want our employees to come from the communities to which we are serving in, because we want people to think that jobs, economic stability, and inclusion means they can participate in UPS anywhere throughout the globe. So we have given, actually our goal for 2020 is to have 20 million volunteer hours from all of our UPSers in our history. So we've asked each of our people to give about 2 hours per month in order to achieve that goal. Another area that I think is very important is to make sure that we give people an opportunity to advance. We talked about how do we do succession planning. We definitely take an opportunity with all of our full-time management folks. We have a talent management system to which we allow them annually to receive a career assessment with their manager. So they sit down once a year and talk about where they want to go. We then craft out with them what it would take to map that out. And we also then make sure that in their current role, they understand what type of performance they need to achieve, but also what other additional roles they would need to have in order to achieve their career aspiration. And in some cases, if the performance is equal, then we then put them into the talent management system, and then our talent management HR team will then sit down with the larger division and or larger district and talk about individuals who are interested, and then make sure between education, experience, and opportunity, we are providing opportunities for our folks to do so. We want to continue to do this in a more enhanced way as we transform, because we recognize there is subjectivity in anything you do, but we want to be able to use our new HR management system to have a transparent way to let everyone self-identify. Is that telling me time's up?
No, you're good.
It could be.
You're good.
But I just wanted to, just in the interest of time, just to talk about the fact that that is really, our career development system is really one area that our folks really enjoy, because not only they get to raise their hand, but we also get an opportunity to see who is interested. And as you know, certain jobs everybody wants to do, and there are certain jobs everybody doesn't want to do. So what we do is we try to take an opportunity to show for those undesirable jobs, there's two incentive tracks. Obviously, we need to know where we have a financially challenged area, we will incentivize with a pay incentive. Sometimes we have a cost of living and a housing allowance, especially when we get to international and expat assignments, to make sure that they can maintain their family lifestyle, as well as be incentivized to do that. But we also then show them people who have gone to some of the places that are not so desirable, who has successfully transitioned into different opportunities and levels of responsibilities or promotions, if you will, who's came through there. Unlike the Army, UPS doesn't have a specific tenure for your tour. So we love the fact that you have a definite time that you have for different assignments. But we do like the fact that we take that opportunity to take something that may not be a positive and give them a very clean understanding of the people that have gone through that assignment or have had that work experience who have gone on for greater opportunity. As well as in those areas, we try to incentivize those folks by telling them that they absolutely have the capacity to do more. And we want to change that branding. We want to change that idea external to that environment. If folks don't want to go there, we want to make sure that the people that are there feel proud about what they do, and that they are not only attached to the community, but we are also doing things to elevate and bring up the morale so that that area does become high performing and an area that's sought out from other employees to be rotated through there. The last thing I'll talk about really is coaching and using job share. We have a long history and relationship with the U.S. Army and making sure that we have folks that are leaving their commissioned office assignments and retiring, that if they would like to transition, that UPS has a lot of affinity, the way we're structured, how organized, our role, our methods, our uniforms, both air as well as our driving uniforms, as well as senior leadership positions. We found a great affinity. In fact, two of my peers on our senior leadership, our general counsel is a judge advocate graduate, as well as a Marine, that are on our senior leaders at UPS. So we have a long history of relationships with the military, and we definitely know that military experience is well appreciated in the civilian world and recognized. And I'd just like to thank the opportunity to speak to you today and look forward to any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Charlene. I will tell you that last year Congress gave us the authority to bring in people as senior officers, not as brand new second lieutenants. So if you're interested, we know people.
Okay. I had to, so one disclaimer, my boss did say, you're not joining the Army, are you?
I think the answer to that question is yes.
So you're saying maybe.
Well, thank you, Charlene, and the rest of the panel. Not only did they have an impressive array of things to put out, we also stayed on timeline, so thank you very much. I'd like to just draw your attention again to the bottom right-hand corner. As we move into the question and answer session, if you text the word Army Talent, one word, to 21000, that will come into the operations section over to your right-hand side. They'll formulate the questions and get them up to us and the panel. As those questions start coming in, I'd like to begin by asking General Callaway. You talked about AIM. Are there any lessons learned as we've rolled out AIM in a couple times? This is, I believe, it's the first AIM ATAP process where we've brought in the entire Army Officer Corps for the transitioning window. Any lessons learned from HRC's perspective? Anything the units could benefit from, or the officers who are competing in the marketplace?
Yes. No, sir, thanks for the question. So, we were supposed to open on the 1st of October. So as the director of OPMD, when we first executed this with the Leavenworth class, it was about 800 people. And so, hey, it worked fine. It was great. And then incrementally, we've increased the number of people that are involved in that. So as I said earlier, this cycle, it's 14,000 people moving at the same time. And then what complicates that even further is now we're operating under a fairly strict rule set that says, hey, you know, if a officer and a unit are a match in terms of their preference and choice, you know, you're going to honor that. So what I didn't fully realize, because, you know, as the CG, you don't actually have to do the work. You know, so you just get to look and say, hey, it looks like it's working fine. But there's a lot of really smart, dedicated people, and when I spent a little time with them the last few weeks, so we had a little technical challenge, and the technical challenge was that all these assignments, you know, they carry with them a rule set. So if, and the most complex of those were the aviators and our AMED folks, and so and just, you know, as an example, I think the business rules or the rules for how you assign those populations literally would go from here to the back of the room. To make sure that you don't have a podiatrist as the chief of neurology, to make sure that you don't have a Black Hawk pilot, you know, flying an Apache kind of thing. So that you have a qualified IP being an IP and those sorts of things. So all those rules actually have to be coded into a computer to make the system work. So again, our goal was, let's make sure that, first of all, officers can, you know, so on the 1st of October, we opened it just to make sure that units and officers could update their data. What we wanted to make sure is that you've actually got good data to make decisions on. So for instance, we had about 1,200 company command positions that were coded as requirements that we validated. Well, we know for a fact that there weren't 1,200 people going directly into command out of their assignment. They're going to get in a queue somewhere in a BCT to get into company command. So we wanted to make sure that for transparency that we worked back with units, and FORSCOM did a lot of work with this, as did the other commands, to make sure that the assignment position information was accurate, and then on the flip side of that, make sure officers had a little bit more time to go in and update their KSBs and unique things on the back of their resume. So the goal was, let's make sure we have best information. So from 1 to 11 October, we did that. On 11 October, let's make sure that officers have the ability to preference. So like I said, I'm sure we're over 6,000 now. That is now working. Our AMED folks were the last folks to come up. They came up yesterday, so that now they can go into the system. And then today we should have the unit side up and operating. So again, it is very complicated code. We're going to continue to work it. We'll have glitches. But again, this is the first big iteration, and we are going to improve over time. So, sir, hopefully that answers the question. If there's other questions about that.
Joe, if I can just add one thing. So, you know, sort of paid political advertising, foot stomping here. If you're an individual in this process, make sure you preference deep. Don't put 5 preferences, go as deep as you actually want to. If you're a unit who actually gets to look at the different candidates for a move, make sure you preference deep as well. That's the way this whole system and the AIM-2 process will actually work. If you choose to go shallow, then you're going to have no data by which to make an assignment decision, whether you're a unit or an individual. And so I'll just, whenever I'm talking about this, I try to emphasize that within this process, both individuals and units who now have complete transparency need to deeply prefer, you know, how they're listing these people out. And that's a very different thing. It's not about your top 5. It's really about your top 100 that you would want to bring, you know, if you're an individual, about where you may want to go. And then you'll get much better satisfaction through this whole process.
Thanks, JP and Joe. JP, while you got the mic, let me ask you the next question. You talked about moving to a data-rich environment. What kind of data or new data are you bringing into the system? How will you use it, and do you have any concerns?
So I think I'll sort of hit the backside of this. I mean, as we bring in all this information, we've still got to follow all the rules and regulations for how we bring in information, and that's not going to change. I think over time, as we start developing this information, we need to be really mindful of how we secure this data, because this could be, you know, potentially used by an adversary. And so that's an additional piece on this as we start looking at how we collect this data. But I'll use an example that I think most of the Army is familiar with in terms of this movement from data poor to data rich, and how it can make us better both operationally and then maybe not have as some of the frustrations people would have. So over the last couple of years, we have made a decision to stand up the Security Force Assistance Brigades, and we've said that we need to have high-quality officers go into that. If we run the system in a data-poor environment, which we sort of are doing right now, what we did is we said, okay, look, we want to have only high-quality officers going into that. And the measurement tool that we used was the manner of performance, basically how they've done in the last couple jobs. Okay, so let's just take captains. We had to take a whole bunch of captains from the combat arms. And so what we said is, let's find the top 10 or 20% of infantry captains who've been really, really good at company command, and let's make them advisors. Okay, so I commanded, my brigade in the 101st, transitioned from being a, IBCT to an SFAB in order to do the mission in Afghanistan, and I can guarantee you that I had phenomenal company commanders who would be lousy advisors, and I had great advisors who would not be very good company commanders. They really are a different skill set. First off, if you're only looking along one variable, which is their manner of performance, then you're always going to be in a constrained market, and you're always going to be constrained because you only have one variable. So what does that look like in the future when we want to stand up a Security Force Assistance Brigade? Well, what it looks like is that we may want to say, okay, let's find those qualities we want to have with an advisor. Okay, so we may want to have someone who has a degree of cross-cultural fluency. We can measure that. We may want to have someone who has a degree of cognitive flexibility, yet another thing that we can measure. We may want to find some people who on the backside of their self-professed knowledge, skills, behaviors says that they're interested in international travel, and they spend their free time and money going to foreign lands and sort of exploring those. Because what better indication of where your true interests lie than how you spend your free time and your own money? And if we had used those and said, let's just say, instead of saying top 10% performers, you would want to find top 50% performers, because you still want to have a strong manner of performance. But you also found all these different variables. What you would have had is probably people who would be better advisors, and you would have been able to take those company commanders who would be really good in that track and allow them to go do other jobs instead of go be advisors as well. So when you can start managing your officer corps like that in a data-rich environment, you make better decisions that actually leads you to higher levels of operational effectiveness, and then better talent alignment over time of the officers, so they're actually doing rewarding work that keeps them motivated about being in the officer. And so you can see how this builds upon itself, and it's a big gain across the Army.
Cool. Thanks, JP. We're starting to get some questions over the texting. If you didn't bring your phone with you, or you still have a flip phone, there are 3x5 cards in all the chairs. You can just take your cards over to the side, and they'll bring it in. Appreciate the answer, JP. Next question is for Charlene. Ms. Thomas, the Army, just like UPS, has a large footprint across the international global perspective. Within the Army, I suspect within UPS, there are some places that are more desirable than other places to be assigned. You mentioned housing allowance and financial incentive. Is UPS doing anything other than those two things to incentivize? How do you attract people or encourage them to go to places that may not be as popular?
So we do many of the incentivizing does take in the form of rewards, but we also do that as far as career pathing. So we want to let them know the why. So you're going to this assignment, why? We're not leaving you there forever. It's really the experiential as to what we want them to learn from there. Kind of give them a framework of how long we would expect them to be there, and to make sure once they leave there that there is an opportunity for them to advance or to move into an area of interest, so that they would want to take the assignment on is probably the priority that we like to make for that.
Cool. Thank you very much. Lenny, you talked about the egalitarian culture. You listed a number of things we need to do that causes the culture and things to maybe get after it. Can you give us, if you were running this and in charge, what would be your top 2 or 3 things you would do first in order to change the culture or set the momentum?
As far as setting the culture for egalitarianism, I think there's 2 imperatives that our institution faces, and that's the functional imperative, and that is, are we here to fight the nation's wars or not? But there's also a social imperative, and that is, do we need to be representative of the society we serve? And those 2 imperatives compete. And I think senior leaders have to take an initiative and say, which one is it? Is it the functional imperative, or is it the social imperative? Because they compete, and we can't pretend they don't compete. And so if we say 84% of this population cannot pass that assessment, well, what are we going to do? Do you want to say the functional imperative is subordinated in this case? Are we willing to take the risk? Or did you really believe in that functional imperative to start with? And then now we have to address the root cause. Why can't 84% of this population pass that assessment? Well, let's address that. Or should we throw out the entire initiative? Or another solution is just lie about it. and just give up fake results, and then we'll all just brief it well. So that's one area. The other thing, as far as being egalitarian, is I think, believe it or not, Army people are very nice to each other. And so we hate giving bad feedback. We love to, when we write an OER for somebody who's lousy, we write it as if they're good, but we code it that they're lousy, because none of us want to tell another person that they're lousy. And we're asking a system to separate people out, and we as people have to be able to tell someone else, you're not the best. I know everyone up to this age that you've lived to have told you that you're the best, but you're not. We still love you, but we're not going to give you that assignment. And I think that's the problem. We've lied to people because it hurts us to tell someone else, you're not the best. I am. No. And so, so that's two things. That's what I would do, is we have to train our leaders to tell people kindly that they're not the best. And the other is we have to ask, what's better at this time, the functional imperative on this initiative or the social imperative?
Lenny, thanks for those thoughtful, candid, honest remarks. I think I think lying's bad, though, to the record. Sergeant Major,
Yes, sir.
as you look at the NCO Corps in the year 2028, what do we need to do to make sure that we capitalize on their talent better?
Okay. I think first and foremost, sir, is that we have to prepare our leaders for the future. And I think we're taking steps to do that right now by the training and the assessments that we're doing right now. Some things that have also been incorporated. Yesterday during the Eisenhower luncheon, the Sergeant Major Army presented the first 11 expert soldier badges to soldiers. That's one of the initiatives that was designed to prepare our soldiers to lead the future. So what it basically is they receive training at their organizations on basic soldier skills, skill level 1 tasks, and it assists them in becoming better leaders. After that training that they receive in their organizations, they are tested just like the EIB, but they are tested on this, and then if they pass this test, then they receive that badge. And it's not a badge that everyone will receive, so you have to, it's seeking for excellence, so individuals must prepare themselves to do that. The other thing is empowering our NCOs. We have to continue to look at ways of empowering our NCOs and allow them to do their jobs and train their subordinates to prepare them to fight our nation's war and lead us into the future. The other things, one of the other things that we're looking at is leader time training, which is formerly known as sergeant's time training. Bringing that back in and actually block off time and have that as sacred time so that individuals can train and better prepare their soldiers to go forward. When we went into war, we lost a lot of that, and believe it or not, that's when the degradation of our leadership skills started to fall. So we have to get back to the basics. We always say basics, but some of us don't know what the basics are. So we have to get back to actually training our leaders and our junior soldiers in order to do that. The assessments that we're doing, talking about assessing soldiers and ensure that we're getting the right soldiers. USAREC has done a great job with assessing soldiers and bringing them into the formations, but they're also implementing tools and ways to better improve that. One of the things is TAP is this assessment. It's called a Tailored Adaptive Personality Assessment, and what that does is that evaluates soldiers on their ability to serve. It assists with attrition weights because it'll tell you if that individual even has the ability to continue to serve or even serving in the Army. So there's a lot of things that are being done to look at not only just soldiers that are in the Army right now, but recruits that we're bringing in the Army as well. Thanks, sir.
Cool. Sergeant Major, while you got the mic warmed up, we got a question from the audience. Will Sergeant Majors be allowed to serve beyond their current retention control points if they're selected for brigade level command Sergeant Major positions in upcoming boards?
A day doesn't go by that I get that question, sir. So yes, with the NCO Evaluation Board, we're looking at ways to kind of do away with the retention control points. So what we're going to do, this evaluation board, it's no longer a promotion board. So when we assess your records at these boards, we're looking at you for schools, assignments, broadening opportunities, as well as retention. So if you're an individual, like say for instance right now, Sergeant Majors can only serve till 30 years unless they're in a nominal program, and then they currently go to 35 years, depending upon what level they're working at. If you are one of those individuals that fall in that category, and a board assesses your record and they say that you're fully qualified to continue to serve, or you have potential to go do greater things in the Army, regardless of what your retention control point is, you could continue to serve. There's going to be some stipulations on that, though. If your CMF is healthy and there's other individuals that can continue to grow and replace you and serve in those positions, we're not going to allow individuals to stay there, because then we're going to get back to where we're trying to get away from, stagnation. Because in the past, that's what was happening. We had SEER, non-commissioned officers, stand in the Army, and that was preventing the junior NCOs to go up. So we were losing a lot of talent because those individuals were getting out of the Army because they seen no room for growth. So the short answer is yes, but there will be some stipulations applied.
For our great NCOs across the formations, what's the best way for them to keep informed on the changes and how we're doing it? Is there a website? Is there a place they can go to get answers?
So you always have the Human Resources Command, their website. There's a lot of stuff there, but what we are really using right now is the Army Career Tracker. There's a lot of information that's being placed on the Army Career Tracker to keep our enlisted force, as well, I'll just say our force in general, informed. But then your leadership, there's things that are being pushed out, the S1 net, all these things that we are putting out, it's out there, but we have to get out there and we get it. And then for the leaders in the room, back to what I talked about earlier, face-to-face discussion. Most senior leaders are well informed and they know what's going on in the Army, but when you go down a couple layers and talk to the soldiers have no idea what's going on. So that communication stops at a certain point. We have to continue to push that communication down to the most junior soldiers, because all these changes and things that are going on in our Army affects them and their families. Thanks, sir.
Cool. Next question from Ms. Thomas. How did UPS build employee trust in the mentoring and coaching system that you described?
Trust is really one of our core values in our policy, and we make sure that all the conversations we have are confidential. We know that many times when we sit down and have discussions with employees about advancement, about work appraisals, that we are trusting that we are building the individual. We definitely know that we are looking to enhance that person's esteem, make sure that they can be not only confident but competent, and then we want to give them the fair opportunity to advance and or at least qualify in their current role so that they can be successful. So I think building trust is an ongoing situation. And it really starts with the individual direct manager, but it also starts with the individual as well, to make sure that to be trusted means that you have to also have the ability to trust your boss and be trusted of your boss. So we want to make sure that's a reciprocal relationship as well, so that individual knows that all things said in confidence are meant to be held that way.
Oh, thank you very much. For JP, how can we continue to ensure that commanders select a diverse workforce within AIM-2, and are we worried at all about nepotism?
So there really are three, when you start talking about AIM-2, and this is probably a good one for General Calloway and I both to answer, but when we talk about AIM-2, and what we've really done is we fundamentally moved down to the brigade commander level, the ability for a brigade commander to hire their own teams in coordination with their division commander. So now colonels have that hiring authority to bring that in. With that comes a tremendous amount of responsibility and frankly a lot more visibility on how we do that. And so I think there are three things that we need to make sure that are managed, and we've actually built in a check at the end of this to make sure it's being done responsibly. So the first one that frequently comes up is performance distribution. So geographically unfavorable locations aren't disadvantaged. So you don't have, I mean, let's be honest, Fort Polk is sometimes hard to get people to go there, and that's not a surprise to anybody in the Army. But there are probably a lot of people who actually really want to go to Fort Polk, and if they're given a better chance to go there. But one of the things we're going to do is we're going to make a check to make sure that there are no locations through this new process that have been significantly disadvantaged in terms of performance distribution that in comparison to the way we would do it with a normal system. The next concern that comes up frequently is there a concern about nepotism? And I would say, yes, there is a concern about nepotism. But I would also begin it with this question. Under the current system, how in the world would you know whether anybody is actually just hiring the people that he or she has always hired his entire career? There is no built-in check, but with this new system that now becomes a little bit more data-rich, we're trying to find a way to make sure you're not just hiring people who've always worked with you. It's a little bit more difficult like that because I think we would all agree there is a piece of that that's okay and is sort of expected, and then there's a piece of it which is unhealthy for the Army, and trying to sort of manage that is really hard. So within this marketplace, there's always two approaches we had. Are we going to regulate this in terms of how we do this, or are we going to illuminate it? And specifically with the idea of nepotism, what we've said is that we want to illuminate that first to see if there is an issue or not. And if there is a significant issue, then we probably have to establish some regulations. I think going in, though, we're going to trust commanders to exercise this responsibility effectively. And the final one is this whole issue of diversity. So you don't just hire people who, look a certain way or act a certain way. And diversity is in all sorts of different, maybe not just from a certain unit, and then all the other ways we look at that. With this new system, we're going to have a much more robust way to be able to identify that, and we're going to be able to see whether commanders are actually meeting Army guidelines, following the letter of the law as we've outlined in the X order, and how they're doing that. And that's going to be an interesting discussion as we start seeing the choices that are made by commanders. But I think at the core of what we have done is we've decentralized some of this, is that we're trusting brigade level commanders to exercise this responsibility effectively. And if they don't, they'll be notified and held accountable for it. And I think that'll be a very uncomfortable conversation to have.
Joe, anything you want to add?
I think he answered. It killed me. I think JP answered it very well. The other thing, matter of fact, the gentleman seated to your far right taught me a very valuable lesson. So Callaway, growing up, learned this lesson about the time he was a colonel. And so he hired somebody that would eventually work for me. And that's somebody given, I knew who the people were in the pool. I said, hey, sir, I trust you. You pick who you think's the best. And then he picked the person, and I said, holy smokes, I never would have picked that person. And, because I would have picked somebody at that time that really was more like me. That person turned out to be the most valuable member on my team. Guess what? It was because that person was exactly not like Callaway. They had all the skills that I didn't. They liked to do the things that I didn't. So I would just, that was an invaluable lesson for anybody, and hopefully you'll learn it a little younger than I did. But JP's question is right on, or his comments are on target. We do this for the battalion command slating. We go through that, and the brigade command slating, and go through that pretty thoroughly to make sure that we are ensuring diversity across the force in all of our formations. And now with this system, we'll have the tools to before we approve the slate, do a same sort of assessment. Did we make the right decision in terms of talent at each location and in each unit, and in terms of diversity in each location and in each unit? So again, we will evolve and learn and get better. But at least we have the metric in place to be able to take a look at it. So.
Joe, if I could just reinforce with one additional point. We actually have at least a pilot that was done with this. It was called Green Pages, run by the Engineer Corps. And what they found is that when they actually executed that with that population, is that those people who were given a hiring authority sort of entered into this process thinking who they were going to hire. But when they saw the totality of the talent that was out there, they made significantly different choices, because they weren't just limited to their own personal experiences. They saw the entire inventory of talent that was available, and they made really different choices than the choices they thought they were going to as they came in. And I think that's now something that's not just within the Engineer Corps, but it's being expanded across the entire Army. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this gets executed.
If we can shift a little bit to BCAP. JP, there's a lot of talk about BCAP. First, how do you avoid undermining the senior rater input through the OER? And second, could you also speak to how the program will be implemented and will apply to brigade commanders?
Okay. So I'll hit the last one first. We have not yet figured out how we're going to do this for brigade commanders. That's work that is ongoing, and I think it's going to take a little bit of time for us to figure that out. So when we're looking at, so I think that's a work in progress right now. I think obviously the things that we're looking at to select someone for a brigade commander will be a little bit different than what we're looking at for a battalion commander. So the chief talked about it, but at the core of the battalion commander assessment program is not a recognition that we had a bad selection system, because I think we had a pretty good one. But the question was, is this the best possible way for the Army to pick someone to put in this critical position? And what we said is, there's probably a better way. And then we ran these pilots down at Fort Benning, and it really confirmed both how our approach should be and then how much value this potentially could have. And so what will happen is 833 officers are about to get a notification that between about the 15th of January to the 5th of February, they need to report to Fort Knox, where they're going to undergo a 5-day process that's going to include physical assessment. They're going to be required to take an APFT. They're going to go through some psychological screening to see whether they've got any issues that should be able to go into battalion command. They're going to take a writing. We're going to take a writing sample and see how they communicate themselves in the written form. They're going to be evaluated how they verbally communicate. And I think it's also important, and they're going to go through a panel process with, there's going to be a series, about 5 high-ranking officers who are going to go through a panel process with those officers. And we're going to take the collection of all that, and we're going to add in as the single largest factor how they have actually performed, but based on their review of the last promotion board. I'm sorry, I'm saying that not very clearly. How they performed in the centralized selection board process will be carried forward and weighted heavily in terms of how we pick the next group. But we're bringing in and folding in a whole bunch of different pieces of data. And the simple premise is that better relevant information about who to pick for battalion command is going to lead to better decisions about who we're going to put in. And we think through this, and another piece of this I didn't mention, we're also going to fold in subordinate and peer feedback. We pick the subordinates, we pick the peers to find out what type of leaders their peers and subordinates. All that information comes in the totality of the assessment for who we're going to put in battalion command. And I think it's going to be really interesting, the information that we gather, the insights that we have, and the choices that we make in terms of individuals we put in this position of critical importance to the Army.
Thank you very much. We have time for one last question I'd like to ask Dr. Wong. Lenny, how do you see the choice affecting our culture? So for the first time ever, officers will have a bigger say in their choice in terms of where they go. Units will have a bigger say in the choice of who comes there to their units. How do you see that affecting the culture?
I think it's a good thing because everyone enjoys the choice, but we have to be careful of our broken expectations. And because just because we have a choice doesn't mean you're going to get it. And so I think, and to counter that, the process has to be transparent. So people have to see, oh, okay, I made this choice, it wasn't fulfilled, and this is why. And if they understand that, that will prevent conspiracy theories from emerging, from just the skepticism running amok.
Cool. Thank you very much. I'd like to open up to the panel for any closing thoughts before we close out the session. Ms. Thomas, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, first I want to humbly apologize to JP Major General. I do apologize.
It's quite all right.
Do not want I know it's a life of service.
If the talent management system in the Army worked, that's where I would have stayed.
Absolutely not. The one point I'd like to really bring home is diversity and inclusion. Really that trust and really the engagement with the employees, that they have to feel that their voice is heard. They have to know that they're meaningfully to the organization. That's one thing as we talk about talent. They have to know you truly care, and they really want to know how they can and be included. It's not just about having a diverse a person at the table. Is their voice heard? Are they respected? Do they feel valued? So as anybody goes through a transformation journey and tries to attain and attract people, making sure that they do have a platform where their voices can be heard is absolutely critical for the success of maintaining a healthy and vibrant workforce.
Sir Major?
Sir, I'd just like to add on talent management. At the enterprise level, we're developing a system to better do this, but we have to remember that there's a few phases to talent management. It's the initial phase where HRC identifies the right individual to go to the right place at the right time. But as that individual arrives to your duty location, the leadership has to take on the role of talent management as well. And that is very important on how do you utilize that individual and how do you develop that individual while they're under your care. The other thing is the individual themselves. They're going to have a lot of opportunities to provide input as we improve this process. And a lot of times soldiers don't use their voice when they have an opportunity to provide their wants and needs, family situation, and things like that to the assignment manager. So just ensure that we coach and teach, and we do that, and so that as the system evolves over time, we can make it better. Thanks. I enjoyed the questions today, and I appreciate it. Thanks, sir.
Joe?
To reinforce the Sergeant Major's point, it's not just about mentoring those folks when they enter your formation. So as the brigade commander, the battalion commander, whoever you may be, your role in mentoring and reaching out to other senior leaders to advocate for people, to talk about talents, to talk to your subordinates about, hey, here are your options, that kind of thing. Absolutely critical to make this system work. So again, if you've got feedback for those of you that are in the AIM market and moving, if you've got feedback about how we make it better, suggestions, please engage, whether you send a note directly to me, you do it via the AIM website, whatever it is. We want your feedback. So appreciate your patience this morning, and thanks for what you're doing.
Lenny?
Although a lot of people don't believe it, I'm actually optimistic about about the way things are going. I just want to make sure that senior leaders especially look beyond the talking points.
Cool. Thanks, JP.
Okay. Well, first off, thanks for being able to talk here. I mean, I do think it's very interesting that Ms. Thomas, raised this thing that you hear when you talk about with industry, and what they talk about is that they are in a war for talent, because they understand the outsized impact of people to the accomplishment of their mission, and they don't call it competition, and they don't call it anything else. They call it a war. And we've got to understand that within the Army, that our most talented are going to contribute the most, and we need to start changing the ways we manage our people so we can draw that out and make sure that we're retaining and employing and developing the most talented so we can be successful in future combat operations. And that's the next piece I want to make is, we talk about preferences and people start to say, well, this is about making everybody happy. No, this is about ensuring that the Army wins future wars. This is about the development, employment, and retention of war-winning talents to fight against near-peer threats in the future. Okay, and you don't do that with antiquated systems, and you don't do that with systems that grind off choice and don't make people feel empowered by having some ownership of their own. And when you start to look at what a future conflict looks like against a near-peer threat, you talk about them having populations that are larger than ours, formerly an advantage of ours. They look at having an economy that is larger than ours, once our advantage. We look at an adversary who has closed the technological gap, and so it's very, very close to what we have. So we need as an Army to maximize the potential and power of our people so that in a future war we show up with the right war-winning talents and then start conducting operations and then win. And then finally, I would just like to say to everybody who's listening, because there are a whole lot of officers here, both listening, across the internet and listening to this, is that everybody loves change until it impacts them. Okay? So everybody is very, very eager to tell me how I need to change aspects of other, it's going to impact other people, but they don't like it when it impacts them. And so what I would ask you to do is understand the change, embrace the change, provide all your skepticism and helpful comments in terms of making that better. But don't be someone who is resistant to this, and make sure that you are embracing the change as it's going to make our Army better and more ready to win future wars, which really is at the core of everything that we're trying to do. Thank you.
Thanks, JP. On behalf of the Secretary of the Army, Secretary McCarthy, the Chief of Staff of the Army, and General Ham, the President of AUSA, I'd like to thank our panel for coming today for a rich and rewarding discussion across the board. Hua? I would also like to thank everybody who took time to be here today or to monitor and stream it. We need your help. I mean, we got a lot of great people thinking about this hard and complex subject, but we're not going to get after it, and we're not going to get after it right unless we get help from across the board. We got a lot of great questions. Didn't get a chance to talk about all the questions, but the questions will be answered, and they'll be posted on talent.army.mil. And I encourage you to, if you have good ideas, if you have challenges, if you have things you want the Talent Management Task Force to think about, go there, contribute, be part of the discussion. Don't react after things have happened. Contribute and influence and shape the way ahead across the board. So thank you very much for coming. Thanks for all the great questions and the discussion. Have a great day. Hua?